Hey readers, writers, and friends, Story Serpent here, and today we're talking about Slug Fest by Gordon Korman, which is incidentally a literary blind spot for me despite him being such a prolific author. This is the first book of his that I've read. This is a contemporary middle grade that was published by Balzer and Bray, which is a HarperCollins imprint. But before we get into that, today's random words are like, share, subscribe, hypertrophy. So, what does the book tell us about itself? Yash is the best athlete at Robinette Middle School. So good, in fact, that he's already playing on the high school JV sports teams. Imagine his shock when he learns that his JV practices have kept him from earning a state-mandated credit for 8th grade PE. To graduate, he has to take Physical Education Equivalency, P, also known as Slug Fest in summer school. Yash gets to know his fellow slugs, Caden, an academic superstar who's physically hopeless, twins Sarah and Stuart, who are too busy trying to kill each other to do any real PE, Jesse, a notorious prankster, Arabella, who protests everything, and Cleo, a natural athlete who has sworn off sports. But when one of them tries to blow the lid off a scandal that could make all their time in summer school a waste, Yash is forced to take drastic action. Teaming up with the most hapless crew in school can really surprise a person, and their teacher might be hiding the biggest secret yet. So in terms of story promises, he's telling us we're going to have an ensemble cast, a scandal that forces Yash into action, and a secret hidden by one of the teachers. So what do we know from the outer trappings? Nice binding, good hardback, bright orange, as you can see. That's a fun color. Definitely going to get a middle grader's attention for sure. The dust jacket is obviously high quality, bright colors, nice and glossy, and it's 292 pages with big font, which is great for young readers. I read through this in about a day. Didn't take me very long at all. So likely a few days for your average middle grade reader, I think. So what's going well? Well, the prose is simple and straightforward. It was eminently readable. Like I said, I cruised through it in about a day. I think there are a few good vocabulary choices in there that'll make kids maybe have to look up a word here and there, or maybe they'll learn something new by context. But for the most part, it's very streamlined. Your middle grader won't struggle with it. As far as the story goes, it's mostly believable, and we'll talk about some of that later on, but it keeps all of its promises. We've got multiple POVs. Originally, I thought it was going to be a dual POV with Yash, our named character in the blurb, but also Chloe. And then we go back to Yash, and then we're introduced to a third character, and they just keep adding on. So we end up seeing multiple points of view throughout the book. This ends up being very interesting, but I also think it takes something away, and I think there are some story choices that happen later on about whose point of view a particular scene is being told from that I think could have been stronger if told from a different perspective. And while the story does keep all of the promises made in that back cover copy, I honestly don't think those are the strongest promises it could have made. There are multiple character arcs happening throughout this story, and some of them are more interesting than others, and honestly, their PE teacher keeping a secret ends up not having a huge impact on the story overall. We could have talked about a lot of different aspects of the story rather than that one. I love that all of our characters are flawed. They all have an arc. They all have something they're overcoming. Chloe and Caden are the best characters. Caden, if you remember from the back cover copy, is, your quintessential nerd, struggles with physical education, but he's brilliant. And then Chloe was, we find out, injured, and so lost out on like her whole last quarter of school, and as a result has to make up everything to go into the next school year. And because of the surgeries that she needed due to her accident, she's sworn off sports. And that actually makes her a very interesting character. She has a lot more to cope with emotionally than I think Yash ever does. And it makes her a fascinating character. If anything, I would have liked to spend more time with both of them. Yash is a good enough main character. His name is actually Arnie Yashenko. So I tried to look up the last name Yashenko because I'm like, not really sure where that's from. And it's looking like maybe a Korman made up name that is playing on a spelling of Yushchenko, which is Ukrainian. So think whatever you want about that, but it looks like he's trying to make a Ukrainian athlete his main character in 2024. Do with that what you will. And honestly, while Yash can carry the bulk of the story, he's just not as interesting of a main character to me, and his flaws do make him tedious to read. He is a star athlete who is incredibly arrogant, very full of himself, very self-centered, and that makes for a really tedious read. At least it did for me. Anytime I found, okay, we're back in Yash's point of view, I kind of, deep sigh, here we go. But believe it or not, he was not the worst. We'll get there. As far as themes go, making the best of whatever situation you're thrown into is a great theme. We all have situations from work to school, family life, home life, our friends' circles. We have these situations that we get thrown into, and we just have to make the best of it. And if you can go in with the attitude that I'm going to get as much out of this as I can, you're always going to be better off in the end than, refusing to put in any effort or just letting things unfold however they will. And that's definitely Yash's attitude in the beginning, and he is very surprised at the end by how much he ends up getting out of his summer school experience. And I think that's a wonderful theme for kids who are going to encounter those kind of situations throughout their life. Another theme throughout is maybe the people involved in a bad situation aren't out to get you. I honestly think the sooner we can introduce kids to the idea that you shouldn't attribute to malice what you can attribute to incompetence is a really good thing for everyone to internalize as quickly as possible. So what's not working? Well, I caught 4 typos, and those are just the ones I caught. So shame on you, copy editor. You know better. Apparently the coach, who is supposedly a baker, doesn't know the difference between simple and complex carbs. That was a goof. And there are a number of times where the voice is very grown up, but in 13, 12-year-old mouths. Middle grade is one of those places where we're doing our best to teach kids both about reading and literature, but also about life. But we're trying to do it through story. That's the most important part, is to tell the good story. And in order to do that, you have to stay true to your characters' voices. And while for the most part, this reads very much like a bunch of, 12, 13, 14-year-olds making their way through a summer school situation, every once in a while you will get this profound bit of very self-aware wisdom that comes out of the mouth of a 13-year-old, and it is so jarring. It just doesn't sound like them, the character, at all. It sounds very much like Gordon going, here's the thing I want to say, and not really being able to pull off it sounding like one of the kids. In terms of characters not working, we gotta talk about Arabella. She has to be the most insufferable, entitled, obnoxious character I have ever encountered. Now, there are some people who might go, well, but what about Hermione being a bit of a know-it-all, especially when Harry and Ron first meet her? Part of the reason that works is because Hermione actually knows dang near everything. She is very rarely wrong, and she always has real information to back up what she's saying. Hermione is also capable of executing on her knowledge in a way that impresses everyone around her. No one can deny Hermione's skill. And while her propensity to be a bit of a know-it-all and and her hypersensitivity to things being fair or unfair do play a role throughout the series. She learns a lot about humility and applied knowledge in those processes. Shall I give you just a taste of how we're introduced to Arabella? I don't know how people can stand all the unfairness in the world. Sometimes I look around the mall or the street or the schoolyard and everyone is laughing and beaming and happy, and I'm like, what's the matter with them? Don't they know houses are falling to the wrecking ball and islands are sinking to the ocean? She then goes on, and within the first 3 pages of her chapter, we understand that her father was a medical student her mother put him through medical school. And then he bailed on the family. So she has a massive chip on her shoulder, and her sense of fairness is driven, and we can tell this throughout the story, not just by her own bitterness, but her mother's bitterness at the situation too. Also, Arabella is clearly not getting the support and help she needs. Being in a broken family, these issues are still dogging her. She has not had the kind of help she needs in dealing with them. And as a result, she has taken on the job of righting all the world's wrongs and refusing to ever be a victim ever again. And by so doing, emotionally victimizes everyone around her. Every time I encountered a chapter entitled Arabella Hop, it was all I could do not to strain a muscle, rolling my eyes. She not only spends all of her time berating other people and thinking that her moral quest makes her superior without any real skill set or knowledgeability to back it up. The story, and remember when I said mostly believable, here's where it goes off the rails. Mouthy know-it-all girl treats superstar athlete to big old diatribe about fairness in the world, and his response is, "You want to hang out sometime?" Are you kidding me? There's not a self-respecting male on the planet who would not put a set of earplugs in his ears just to make it through a single conversation with this girl. I think it sets up a terrible expectation that you can be pushy, rude, obnoxious, that you can get into people's faces about every single thing that's going wrong in the world and spend all your time dwelling on those things and endear people to you. It does not work that way. And to set up that expectation for young girls and young men, I think does all of the middle graders who will read this a serious disservice. This book probably could have been just fine without Arabella. I guarantee you there are story ways to get around her. We could have pulled her from the book completely, and the story serpent would have enjoyed it a great deal more. While I do appreciate the multiple points of view, I will note Fiona, who is a named character, going through the same summer school program, never gets a chapter. Stuart, one of those twins we read about in the back cover copy, never gets a chapter. And then we are forced to slog through a chapter from the perspective of one of Yash's meat-headed athlete friends, Hammond. And frankly, his chapter starts with a sentence that tells you the guy's a sadist. Why we are spending any time in his point of view, and why Yash continues to be friends with him at the end of the book, astonishes me. Ham and his other friend, they bail on Yash almost as soon as they realize he's not going to be able to be at practices. Maybe he's not going to be the star guy on the JV team next year. And they cut him out almost completely. There's very few instances of them just spending their extra time together. And the one time they do is once again Yash on full display as being an entitled jerk. The ball comes out of my hand hot and blazes across the concourse. Hammond snatches it out of the air 6 inches before it would have slammed into the iFix Screens kiosk in the middle of the mall. Hammond is a natural receiver. Great hands. Amir and the girls applaud, but the iFix screen guy isn't as much of a fan. Nice catch, he grumbles. Do it someplace else next time, like in Timbuktu. So of course we run the play again, because nobody tells us what to do. Mall football is strictly against the rules, but that shouldn't apply to Hammond, Amir, and me. There are no bad throws. We always make every catch. So again, this kid literally thinks the rules shouldn't apply to him because he has an athletic skill set. And that is either commentary on him as a character, but I think it's also commentary on the way kids socialize and the way we socialize them. Individuals who do display a lot of ability and skill in the realm of the athletics do often get perks that other students don't, and other talents and skills are kind of sidelined. And that can lead kids like Yash to believe they deserve more, or that the rules shouldn't apply to them, or that they shouldn't have to struggle like other people do. And that ends up not serving them in the long run, because I think we all know that guy who was the high school football king and is now an overweight divorcee with a receding hairline and a dead-end job. If you don't understand that you have to work for everything and that gravity works on you too, you're going to end up encountering a really rough life ahead of you. And I don't like that Yash gets away with a lot of this. And speaking of arrogant athletes who get away with everything, there's Nate. Nate is the newcomer who ends up acting as our antagonist. He's the new guy that is probably going to end up getting Yash's spot on the football team. He is tall, blonde, blue-eyed. He's the one who puts up with Arabella's endless yammering. He is also very kind and supportive of Caden the nerd. So he's not only full of athletic prowess, one of the few people in the book who's physically described at any length and is described as being quintessentially American attractive, but he's also more compassionate by far than the other characters. He's basically described as perfect, and as far as we know, his one and only flaw is that when his dad tells him he's going to register for a football team he's not supposed to, he obeys his dad, which isn't necessarily a personal failing. This kid is functionally perfect throughout the whole story, so naturally, his comeuppance is a moment of struggle session over his white privilege that he has to do over the microphone at the award ceremony at the end of the flag football tournament. It's ridiculous. And frankly, it doesn't do any of the other characters any favors. It just proves, by the end, that he's still better than everyone else there. So I'm not sure that's the point that Gordon was going for, but that's what he ends up getting in the end. Thematically, if there's one nit that the story serpent has to pick here, it's that Korman uses fairness as a proxy for that which is right. He spends an inordinate amount of time in this book talking about what is fair or unfair, and whenever a character admits I did something wrong, it's always in the context of what is fair. What that was unfair of me, and therefore I shouldn't have done that. Life is not fair, and oftentimes doing that which is right requires doing something that by its nature is unfair. It may end up being just in the end, but mercy by its nature isn't fair. If it was fair, it wouldn't be mercy, you'd deserve it. And making fairness a proxy for right and wrong is how we end up with a population of Arabellas. And the story serpent can think of nothing more insufferable or hellish than that. Overall, this book is trying to do way too many things with way too many characters, while not quite doing enough with the best characters that we just don't get to see often enough. Overall, the story serpent gives it a mostly meh, Mostly because I don't think your average 11-year-old boy is going to be able to slog through Arabella's chapters. I'm betting he gets to chapter 4 and just stops. So, if your kid brings this one home from the library to do his summer reading, might be okay, but also don't be surprised if he doesn't make it to the end. If you happen to read this one, or if your kid happens to read this one, tell me how it goes. And if there's a book that you would like to see the Story Serpent take on, let me know about it down in the comments. Till we meet again, read on, write on, stay sharp.